Yeah, but the trouble is, by the time I get there, it's gone. For 9 years, they made America laugh as hillbillies turned millionaires. But when the cameras stopped rolling, the real tragedy began. Hidden illnesses, secret feuds, and sudden deaths tore the cast apart. One star collapsed on Broadway, another attempted a desperate political campaign that ended in humiliation. Today, the shocking truth about what happened to TV's favorite family will leave you speechless. Buddy Ebsen. After the Beverly Hillbillies ended in 1971, Buddy Ebsen could have retired. He was already 63 years old and had just finished 9 years as Jed Clampett, a role that made him a household name. But instead of slowing down, he started something completely new. In 1973, Buddy surprised everyone by taking on a very different role. He became Barnaby Jones, a serious private investigator in a crime drama. This wasn't anything like the funny and laid-back Jed Clampett. As Barnaby, he played a determined detective solving his son's murder. The show was a big hit and ran for 8 years. Buddy appeared in every single one of its 178 episodes, proving he wasn't done yet. By the time it ended in 1980, Buddy was 72 and had been the star of 2 long-running shows back-to-back, something very few actors ever manage. Even after Barnaby Jones, Buddy kept acting. In 1981, at the age of 73, he starred in a TV movie called Fire on the Mountain. Then, in 1986, he was in another one called Stone Fox. In 1984, when he was 76, he even had a recurring role in the action show Mad Houston. It seemed like Buddy never let age slow him down. One of the most surprising things he did came much later. In 1999, at 91 years old, Buddy made a voice cameo in the animated series King of the Hill. This small role happened 37 years after he first became famous as Jed Clampett, showing how long his career lasted. But he wasn't just an actor. He loved sailing and was really good at it. He even designed his own catamaran called Polynesian Concept. This wasn't just for fun, he raced it in international competitions. In 1968, while he was still on the Beverly Hillbillies, he sailed his boat to victory in a 125-mile race from Newport Beach to Ensenada, finishing in under 14 hours. Buddy was creative in other ways, too. He wrote more than 80 songs and even created 2 stage plays called The Champagne General and Turn to the Right. He wasn't just an actor, he was a songwriter, a playwright, and a man full of ideas. Later in life, Buddy decided to live a simpler life near the ocean. Instead of staying in Hollywood, he built a house on Balboa Island, a quiet place off the coast of Newport Beach. It was the perfect home for someone who loved the water as much as he did. Even as he got older, Buddy stayed active and loved sharing stories from his amazing career. On his 93rd birthday in 2001, he went on Larry King Live to talk about his life. He was still full of energy and charm. Buddy passed away on July 6, 2003, at the age of 95. A week later, TV Land aired a special marathon of the Beverly Hillbillies to honor him. It was a touching way to celebrate his life and remind everyone of how much he achieved in his incredible career. Irene Ryan. After the Beverly Hillbillies ended on March 23, 1971, Irene Ryan's life changed completely. She was 68 years old, but retirement was not on her mind. Instead of playing Granny Daisy Moses in spin-offs or commercials, she decided to return to live theater. It was a bold choice, especially for someone her age, but Irene was determined to keep performing. Later that year, she joined a 30-city tour of the musical Pippin. It was a tough schedule with 8 shows a week. Irene worked harder than anyone expected. Even though she was small and nearing 70, her energy amazed everyone. She stayed busy backstage, too, managing the chaos like a true professional. People said she had the same drive as she did in her vaudeville days. In the show, she played Baird, the grandmother of the lead character. Her song No Time at All became a favorite. Audiences loved her so much that they gave her standing ovations every night. Critics praised her, too. The New York Times even said her performance was so powerful that her co-star couldn't deliver his next line because the applause lasted so long. Irene's big Broadway debut came on October 23, 1972, in New York City. People were amazed to see her go from being Granny to becoming a star of the stage. Her hard work paid off when she was nominated for a Tony Award on March 26, 1973. It was a huge moment for her, and everyone celebrated her success. But then something terrible happened. On March 10, 1973, during a performance, Irene collapsed. It seemed like a stroke, but she insisted on finishing the show. Afterward, she returned to California to see a doctor. That's when she got heartbreaking news. She had an aggressive brain tumor called glioblastoma, and doctors said she only had weeks to live. Even as she lay in the hospital, people were still praising her performance. On April 16, 1973, the Tony Award nominations were announced, and Irene's name was on the list. Sadly, she never got to attend the ceremony. Just 10 days later, on April 26, 1973, Irene passed away. She was 70 years old. Her sudden death shocked everyone, especially since it had only been weeks since she was performing on stage. But before she died, Irene made sure her legacy would last. She left her entire fortune, over $1 million, to create the Irene Ryan Foundation. The foundation gives scholarships to young actors, helping them achieve their dreams. The first scholarships were awarded in 1972, just before she passed. Since then, the foundation has helped thousands of performers, many of whom have gone on to successful careers. His business ideas, at the same time, he worked hard to prove he could be successful outside of acting. Today, at 87 years old, Max Baer Jr. is the last surviving cast member of the Beverly Hillbillies. His life shows how he turned challenges into opportunities. He built a new career as a filmmaker and entrepreneur, even when things were tough. Raymond Bailey, after the Beverly Hillbillies ended in 1971, saw his life change completely. He had played the funny and nervous banker Milburn Drysdale for almost 10 years. People loved him for the role, but when the show was canceled, everything slowed down for him. He was already 67 years old, and finding new work became very hard. His last roles were in 2 Disney movies. In Herbie Rides Again, 1974, he played a sneaky businessman. Then, in The Strongest Man in the World, 1975, he acted as a college dean. These roles showed how Hollywood only saw him as a serious authority figure. After that, Bailey stopped acting for good. His retirement wasn't a choice. During the final episodes of the Beverly Hillbillies, Bailey started showing signs of Alzheimer's disease. It slowly got worse, and by 1976, he couldn't even recognize his closest friends. His wife, Gabby George, whom he had married in 1951, took care of him. Bailey used to love meeting fans and enjoying life, but as his condition worsened, he stayed away from everyone. He spent his final years quietly, living between a houseboat and a small home in Laguna Niguel. The only person from the show he kept in touch with was Nancy Culp, who played Miss Jane Hathaway. He called her Slim as a nickname. In the 1970s, Alzheimer's wasn't well understood. Most people thought it was just part of getting old. Bailey's health got worse quickly, and he needed constant care. This was very different from his character, Drysdale, who was always sharp and clever, trying to keep the Clampetts' money in his bank. Money became another big problem. Even though the Beverly Hillbillies was a very popular show, Bailey didn't earn what TV stars make today. Actors back then made about $1,500 to $3,000 per episode, which would be around $10,000 to $22,000 today. There wasn't much money from reruns either. On top of that, medical bills kept growing, and his savings ran out. It was sad because he had spent years playing a character who was obsessed with saving money. Even after his career slowed down, Bailey was admired by bankers. While the Beverly Hillbillies was on TV, he got hundreds of invitations to speak at banking events every year. Bankers loved how he made their profession look important even while surrounded by the Clampetts' chaos. Bailey had actually worked in a bank in his 20s as a messenger, but he quit because he thought it was boring. Many years later, he used that experience to make Drysdale seem more real. Once, he joked that bankers saw Drysdale as someone trying to civilize wild clients, just like they had to deal with their own tough customers. Bailey passed away on April 15, 1980, from a heart attack. He was 75 years old. He didn't want a public funeral, so his ashes were scattered at sea. His death didn't get much attention. There was only a short obituary in the Los Angeles Times, which was very different from the big tributes some of his co-stars received. Still, his role as Milburn Drysdale left a mark. In 2019, the American Bankers Association gave him a special award for making banking look relatable and funny during tough economic times. Bailey once said, "Money can't buy happiness, but it can buy a good tie." He probably would have loved how this award turned out to be his final punchline. Nancy Culp was famous for playing Miss Jane Hathaway on the Beverly Hillbillies, but her real life after the show was full of ups and downs. She went through a lot of challenges, some surprising twists, and moments that showed how strong and determined she was. Her story is about much more than just her TV role. In 1984, when Nancy was 62, she decided to run for Congress. She wanted to represent Pennsylvania's 9th District. Even though it was mostly Republican, she was a Democrat and cared about things like helping the environment and improving education. She believed she could make a difference, even though people were unsure about her because of her Hollywood background. Nancy told voters that if Ronald Reagan could go from acting to politics, so could she. She said, "Anyone who listens and cares can do well." But things took a bad turn when Buddy Ebsen, her co-star on the Beverly Hillbillies, supported her opponent. Buddy made a radio ad saying Nancy was too liberal for Pennsylvania. This hurt Nancy a lot because they had argued about politics before. She was a Democrat, and he was a Republican, but she never thought he'd attack her publicly. She later said, "He's not the kindly old Jed Clampett. It's none of his business." Sadly, the ad ruined her chances, and she lost badly, getting only about a third of the votes. The fight with Buddy stayed with her for years. She didn't let anyone mention his name around her. They finally made up right before she died, and Buddy admitted the ad was a mistake. Even though Nancy became famous from the Beverly Hillbillies, she didn't make as much money as people might think. She got paid $5,000 per episode, which was good back then but not enough to last her whole life. After the show ended, her roles on TV paid much less, and by the 1980s, she was struggling with money. Things got worse when she got cancer because the treatments were expensive. She lived quietly in Palm Springs, California, teaching acting to make some extra money and relying on checks from reruns of the show. Unlike some of her co-stars, she didn't get rich from her time on TV, and that made her later years tough. Nancy's personal life was very private. She believed in fighting for civil rights and supported LGBTQ+ causes even before many people talked about them openly. Near the end of her life, she told friends she was a lesbian, but she never said it publicly. She had been married in 1951 to a man named Charles Dacus, but they divorced in 1961. Nancy never liked to talk about him and once said, "Some doors are better left unopened." People believed their marriage ended because they were very different, but Nancy kept the details to herself. After her political loss, Nancy found a new purpose in teaching. She became a teacher at Juniata College in Pennsylvania in 1985. She taught drama, directed plays, and gave lectures about how women are shown in the media. Her students loved her and said she was tough but caring. Nancy enjoyed sharing her Hollywood stories and teaching young people about the power of storytelling. Acting was still part of her life, and she even appeared in an episode of The New Love Boat in 1989, but teaching became what she loved most. Nancy passed away on February 3, 1991, when she was 69 years old. People remembered her as a talented actress, a brave politician, and someone who stood up for what she believed in. Over time, more people have come to appreciate how much she cared about helping others and supporting causes she believed in. When the Beverly Hillbillies started streaming online, new generations got to see her as Miss Jane Hathaway again. Nancy's life wasn't easy, but she faced her challenges with strength and showed that there's more to a person than what you see on the screen. Harriet E. McGibbon became famous for playing Margaret Drysdale on the Beverly Hillbillies. Her character was a rich, snobbish woman who caused trouble for the Clampetts. After the show ended in 1971, her life took a different path, filled with challenges, losses, and some surprising stories about her family's history. When the show ended, Harriet was already 66 years old and had worked in entertainment for 50 years. She kept acting a little after that, but only in small roles. She played a rich hostess in a TV movie called The Judge and Jake Wyler in 1972 and made her last appearance in The Best Place to Be in 1979. She also appeared briefly on Bewitched and Mannix, but because everyone saw her as Mrs. Drysdale, it was hard for her to get new roles. In an interview, she said it upset her because she had played big roles in Shakespearean plays before. Even though acting work slowed down, she stayed active for a while, attending parties and charity events in Beverly Hills. Using family money, Harriet didn't talk much about this part of her life, but in 1985 she donated his journals to a historical society to preserve his story. Harriet spent her final years living quietly in a small house in Beverly Hills with a nurse to help her. She liked to start her mornings with tea and scones and watch old movies in the afternoon. She loved watching one of her old films, For Horsemen of the Apocalypse. In 1985, she attended a reunion for the Beverly Hillbillies and wore Mrs. Dale's famous fox stole, but she left early because of breathing problems. She passed away in 1987 at the age of 81. She didn't want a funeral, and her ashes were placed at Forest Lawn Cemetery with a plaque that said, "All the world's a stage." Even though people mostly remember her as Mrs. Dale, Harriet had a long and interesting life. She was one of the first radio actors to perform live sound effects and even helped change the way dialogue was performed in American theater. Her Beverly Hillbillies character also quietly challenged gender roles by never apologizing for being ambitious. Today, her performance still inspires actors, and the scholarship she started in her son's name has helped many students. Harriet's life was full of ups and downs, but she left behind a legacy far bigger than just one TV role. Bea Benaderet played cousin Pearl Bodine in the Beverly Hillbillies. Even though she was only in 22 episodes during the first season in 1962 to 1963, people loved her character. On October 17, 1963, she filmed her last episode. Officially, she left to star in her own show, Petticoat Junction, but the real story was more complicated. At the time, Bea was secretly dealing with health problems. She had been diagnosed with a tumor in her left lung in 1963, but she didn't tell anyone. This happened just as the Beverly Hillbillies became a big hit. Around the same time, Paul Henning, the show's creator, gave her a hard choice. He told her she could either stay as Cousin Pearl or take the lead role in his new show, Petticoat Junction. Bea loved playing Pearl, but the chance to star in her own show was too good to turn down. Before leaving, CBS tried to convince her to stay. They even offered to double her salary. Bea thought about it, but she decided to keep her promise and moved to Petticoat Junction. At first, it was hard for her to adjust. She had trouble letting go of Pearl's accent and mannerisms. It caused delays on set, and some people wondered if she was the right fit. But Bea's talent was undeniable, and the show became a success. While Bea was thriving in her career, her health got worse. In 1967, during the 5th season of Petticoat Junction, she had surgery to remove the tumor. Sadly, doctors found her lung cancer had spread and couldn't be treated. Bea kept working as much as she could, even though she was very sick. Her last episode aired on September 28, 1968. She couldn't appear on camera, so her voice was used instead. Fans didn't know it would be her final performance. Bea passed away on October 13, 1968. Just before she died, her former co-star Buddy Ebsen visited her. Later, he shared that Bea's last words to him were, "Tell Pearl I said goodbye." Her death shocked everyone. Petticoat Junction didn't address it directly at first, saying Kate Bradley, Bea's character, was visiting relatives. Fans felt this was unfair and didn't honor her memory. Bea's legacy didn't end there. Her son, Jack Bannon, appeared on the Beverly Hillbillies in 1969 as a tribute to his mother. Buddy Ebsen helped arrange it. Years later, in 2006, Bea was inducted into the National Radio Hall of Fame for her earlier work in radio. In 2018, on what would have been her 112th birthday, a special event celebrated her role as Betty Rubble in The Flintstones. Fans gathered for a live reading of a lost episode written just for her.